about 700 people registered. Let's see how many will join us during this talk. And we have started to collaborate with the Resilient Frontiers about 2 years ago in Songdo. And we are welcoming all our speakers in a second. My name is Harald Neidhardt. I'm the CEO and curator of Futur.io. And the Futur.io Institute, our main theme is moonshots for desirable futures. And Yusuf had a sentence about this already. We will invite him in a second to stage to welcome us here on this booth. So we are in 2021, and at about a similar, let's say, time frame, 60 years ago exactly this year, JFK started and invited Congress to see if he can sponsor, he gets the sponsorship and the money to go to the moon. Basically said, we want to go to the moon, bring a man, we would say probably a human, to the moon and bring him safely back to Earth before this decade is out. And we're in a similar situation. We need all of you in the room, all of you on the streams, everybody here, maybe 20,000 plus people in Scotland to feel like Kennedys and think about the almost unimaginable, where would we be at the end of this decade? And we know that the SDGs and most of the global goals are mainly targeted towards the 2030 timeframe. And the 2030 timeframe for climate goes then beyond to 2050. So we will try to talk today with a couple of experts, which are our fans, which are our part of our faculty at Futur.io. And I will introduce them in a little bit. And the agenda for today is to have a quick introduction from Youssef Nassef, the Director of Adaptation of the UN, about the Resilient Frontiers Hub here and the Resilient Frontiers Lab in Scotland and the work of Resilient Frontiers. And then we will invite 3 experts, which are already here, to talk about us and about the new white paper we are releasing today under the theme before this decade is out. And the sound maybe needs new batteries in her microphones or something. So without further ado, let me introduce Dr. Youssef Nassef, the Director Adaptation of the UN Climate Secretariat. And maybe you can introduce us a little bit about your work at Resilient Frontiers, your new logo, congratulations, and maybe also some people in the audience. And you take it easy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Harold, and thank you to everyone for being here. I already mentioned a bit this morning some background on Resilience Frontiers, but I think we have an audience online now and we have a lot of new people here. So the idea here, let me tell you how the initiative came into being and why. From the climate change context, you know that we've had the Paris Agreement out in 2015, and it laid out a way forward that was actually very generous with timelines. So the first time we were supposed to look at how well we were doing was in 2023. We were actually expecting the Paris Agreement to enter into force by 2020. But what happened is things got accelerated a bit. In 2018, we got a report from the scientists sounding an alarm bell, telling us, hey, you've only got a decade to shift everything, redo your whole socioeconomic system, or else you're doomed. Then a year later, from the biodiversity folks, we got another report from the scientists saying exactly the same thing, but in the context of biodiversity. And then I came back to this process and found that it was just proceeding in the same exact way. And I'm right in the middle of it. I support the adaptation items here and was wondering, so who's going to do that transformation? You know, it's being asked for. Civil society is very aware of it, especially the youth. And yet there doesn't seem to be a central place to think of what it means to have that sustainable world to which we are transforming into the future, and what has to change exactly and how and what tools. So we created this initiative using foresight methodologies, and Harald was instrumental in helping in the creation of this this methodology. We got scientists thought leaders from all the different technological areas, AI, blockchain, big data, etc., and got people from the sectors, the vulnerable sectors. We got people from the institutions, finance, education, etc., and got them all to think through that methodological exercise on what needs to change or where do we head towards, and came up with 8 pathways, visions of what that resilient future looks like. And it's really interesting because it's each one of them is a combination of so many different things. So it's quite uncomfortable to people who are used to compartmentalizing, you know, health, agriculture, whatever. That's not how the future works. If you want to transform, then none of this works. It needs a totally different mindset of how systems transformation does not mean transformation within systems, but transformation of the systems in that you're replacing them by new ones and new mindsets, thinking about reforming our relationship with nature, rethinking what learning means even, rethinking what value means, money, prosperity, growth. So all of these things are part of the Resilience Frontier story. And here in the lab, we've dedicated one day to each of the pathways. So tomorrow is pathway 1, which deals with revising the human interface with nature, especially taking account of indigenous values. We believe that indigenous values have been successful over millennia in maintaining that harmony with nature, whereas we in our lives have messed up within just 200 years. And if we continue this way, we know where we're heading. I was very intrigued by a statement earlier by Hindu Umaru Ibrahim, where she gave us the proxy of the human body as a proxy for the earth. And so I woke up in the morning, I went to have breakfast, but knowing that a croissant is really bad for me, I still had one. And, you know, put some sugar in the tea and did a lot of bad stuff, knowing that since I'm not going to see the effect immediately, I convinced myself that, okay, you know, it really doesn't matter. I feel it's the same with the earth. If we treat it as a system, yes, tomorrow looks the same as today, today looks the same as yesterday, and yet we're doing things in many ways that can end up with the same predicament that I am facing eventually with my human body if I continue eating fat and sugar. And so this transformation of how we look at nature and trying to define the mindset shift that takes us away from having to address the future through today's givens. Because if we do that, we will never cross that bridge. And in the morning, I read out a few commitments from 49 years ago from the Stockholm Environment Declaration, which came out of the Human Conference on Human Development at the time, UN Conference on Human Development, which had commitments very similar to the ones we're calling for today. And you wonder, okay, if we wanted to do that 50 years ago, why are we still asking for it now? And will we be still asking for it 100 years from now and continuing with the business as usual thing until we face imminent collapse? And usually traumatic experiences like this induce that change that we're looking for. We've seen it in world wars, we've seen it in huge traumatic events where the world suddenly transforms. So the question is, how do we transform without necessarily going through that 11th hour traumatic event? And that is the purpose of this thinking. So one of the outcomes would be to identify events, black swan type events that would trigger these massive transformations. And in history, we've seen a lot of them happen. We're looking at these, how did they happen? The problem is when they happened, they were never planned. Things that actually converted the world from one place to another did it without planning. It just happened. And we're trying to see how can we make it happen in a more predictable and planned way. We call them blue swan events. It could be a movie. A movie can transform people's mindsets. It could be a specific piece of legislation, or it could be an action of activism. And you've seen these types of things that go viral without anyone understanding how. So we have people working on the methodologies for this. And here we're trying to co-create, we're trying to push the envelope of knowledge and of insights within the coming 10 days. And so we're hoping that if you join us, in the pathway or pathways that interest you, you will be part of that co-creation and will be able to help us push that envelope beyond what is known today, which we know is not enough for what is actually needed. We want to show that the transformation is not just possible and that it is not just desirable, but is also absolutely imperative and necessary. So with this, I leave you and thank you very much. Back to you, Harald.
Thank you, Yusuf, very much for this kind introduction to our theme today. Thank you so much. I want to just point out so that today we are launching this white paper of Before This Decade is Out, which is a free download now. And if you're in the room, I give you the QR code a little bit later. But everybody on screen, you can download it now at Futur.io on the website. And I have to thank the contributors of this because this is part of an upcoming book, which we plan to launch next year. And we have basically the first 100 pages done with contributors from various organizations, but more or less they're all faculty members of Futur.io. I want to point out the curators helped me to organize this is Pascal Morgan and Christian C2, which will also introduce some of the inner aspects and the content of it right after the stream. When we close from here, we will switch to their introduction. So what I would love to do is now introduce the people who are here, who are also contributing to the white paper. And we have part of the, let's say, authors in the white paper are Jennifer Schenker from the Innovator. Then we have Carsten Linz, former CDO and board member in various organizations, a World Economic Forum expert. And there's also Ellen Moore, who writes about startups, especially like Climeworks. And these are the, let's say, the ones which are not present. And present here today is Mark Buckley. He is a SDG activist, and he is a founder of the Aloha Regeneration Regenerative Foundation. We have Tia Kansara, which you already saw in the introduction here today. She is the CEO of Replenish Earth and very active in especially cities and other organizations to go towards climate change and the sustainable goals. And last but not least, we have also Diane Dane, who was formerly with the UN in various functions, United Nations Tech Innovation Lab leader before. She was also shortly with the World Health Forum, and now she's the Chief Innovation Officer of the World Humanitarian Forum, as well as with Chief Innovation Leader with Quiet Mark. And there are topics in the book which we will discuss later now with the panel. So I have an opening question, and then I want to invite you to join me on stage, and we do a little bit of a hand microphone, let's say DJ juggling. So why don't you come into the stream, join me on stage. Diane Dane, a pleasure to see you after you spent a couple of time in Scotland already. Diane, so we have the first question here, which interests the people in the room. We see here, we're shifting mindset and shaping the future. So what we want to discuss is how can future foresight, moonshot thinking, or any methods of future literacy can actually be used to adapt and to achieve the climate goals, to achieve basically what we have to achieve for our future generations. And that is a topic, I think, which is close to your heart, youth, as well as you represent here the UN double X. So maybe you can share a little bit first about, let's say, what's your view on, let's say, future methods of future foresight, and then we pass it on.
Oh,
yeah.
Well, thank you, Harald. I come today with dirt on my feet from the Scottish Highlands because I believe that I'm a mother of four, I'm a grandmother of four, and I believe that the future lies in youth and connecting them with a deep love for our planet. And this all starts because we are so disconnected from the mother that has literally nurtured us all. And it's something that we need to figure out for the future. It's probably the most important thing that we need for the future. It really is love. I'm going to use the L word. I know you love that word. But as I was setting up the UN Technology Innovation Labs and I held all the early workshops, there were very few women that came to these workshops. And when they did, they expressed a deep desire and interest in being a part of the groundbreaking solutions which we were going to develop. And so a big part of what we need to do is focus on the feminine and focus on the feminine in each one of us. It's not gender specific. I believe it's stronger with women, but it comes through all of us. And we need to bring that forward, that compassion, care, connection, love that we have for each other, for the planet. And without it, I'm afraid to say, Harald, that I think the future, the technology that we have will outrace us. And so our real gift to the planet as humans is the fact that we can love, that we can care, that we have compassion, that we know that nurture is the only thing that is going to raise up a future in which we want to live. Without it, we have nothing, because we have artificial intelligence that is going to be fast on our heels. So
thank you. Let's go to Tia. Thank you so much. Yeah, applause is fine. Thank you. Tia, what's your view on futurism, if you want to use? Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Now we've got two mics. One of the things that I love so much about foresight is that it's a creative process. We start with not knowing what the answer is, and we still don't know what the answer is even after that, but we've got a process. So moonshot thinking is a great way to launch ourselves almost like a little rocket into the future and sort of retrocast some of these thought processes. When we're looking at cities, do we know that cities are even going to exist in the future? In the past, say, 12, 18 months, what was the first thing that you wanted to do? Get out of the city, probably get out of your four walls, get out of your apartment on the 24th floor of X building. So what does an environment that has shifted do to your brain? When we often look at epigenetics, it is the study of the way that a physical environment can also shift our response from a DNA perspective. We're humans, yes, shift, of course. If you go into my DNA stream of programming language of all of humanity, you'll probably find the same thing in your capability as well, in your body. So when you activate that DNA, what's the potential that you can achieve? So from the city's perspective, I think we have a DNA of what we call civilization. But if I go back to the cities of Shibam in Yemen, if I go back to the cities of Aleppo in Syria, Damascus in Syria, if I go to Jericho in Israel, many of these environments that we've created have been developed as a moment of a time and a place. So if we want a future that is a bit more applicable to what we want, perhaps it's time to wipe out what the architects would call an architectural plan, a master plan, and invert it. What would happen if you turned it upside down is the question.
Thank you, Tia. Nice brain thoughts already. And all these things are almost discussion starters, which we hopefully can do in the break as well. So we will have a couple of rounds diving deeper in these topics. So I want to invite Mark and say, well, you have been a futurist for the sustainability since years. And what's your take? How can we use futurism, future thinking, moonshot thinking, anything? How does it help in achieving the sustainable development goals and especially climate?
So a lot of the time when people say, what does futurism, foresight have to do with sustainability, with resilience, with regeneration? Well, it has everything to do with it. If you don't have a clear vision of what a sustainable future looks like, what a regenerative future looks like, what a resilient future looks like, or like Kim said, a utopian future looks like, then we really have no path or guide or way to achieve that. When I was younger, Star Trek was big on TV, science fiction, and they showed us, the tricorders, the hollow rooms, the transporters, all sorts of futuristic things, interracial marriages and things, and we could engineer, do movie magic, and create for that vision of the future. for the United Nations, I wrote the Sustainable Development Goal Manifesto to give those who do not know what it would feel like to live December 2030 in that future, having achieved the Sustainable Development Goals or the Paris Agreement, what that would feel like when you stand there. And that's why I wrote that, to give this kind of almost utopian vision of what it would mean to achieve that. How would it feel for you? So future and foresight and all these things have so much to do with sustainability. There are many other pillars. I don't want to go on too long. There's thinking about economics. There's thinking about sustainable innovations for purpose, and many other things that we need to kind of think, are we making the future worse? Are we making it better? What will it look like if we achieve the roadmap or the vision that we set now? We've talked about stories. So that's just a little teaser, I would say.
Okay, we come back to that, Mark. Thank you. So I think if we use moonshot thinking, this word, for example, is almost now eclipsed by, we know, the Earthshot, right? Earthshot Prize was very interesting and had really amazing startups. One of the startups, for example, in Neidhardt, was doing hydrogen. They're part of our program. So, and you can see that an idea which actually originated in Thailand, where somebody wanted to build their house in a regenerative way, he had to seek European technology, and then he ended up basically co-founding the company, starting it, and then now scaling it. So ideas can come from all around the world, all around the room, and it's all about cross-pollination. And so what I think for me is important to say is that actually, if you go to the moon, or let's say have this moonshot thinking, it's actually not to go out and land on that moon. It's actually to go out and have the overview effect, which astronauts have, less than about 500, or let's say now it's less than 600 people, humans, have seen this, but basically looking back to our Earth and say, well, this is it. That's the only place we have. There's no reasonable distance to any kind of planet B. So we know all this, the streets know it, our kids know it, and now we have to somehow get into the action part, as we know. So I want to basically try maybe what Mark said and ask you about, well, the future 2030. So what would a future look like when your topics or your point of view, what you care about, your world would be, in a positive way? What's sort of your vision of a desirable future?
Thank you. Well, from my perspective, solutions are not always top down. They're generally found by the people who are living the problems. And we quite often view them as vulnerable populations, but we don't view them as actually part of the actual real community builders and solution builders. And I led the UN Reboot Accelerator based on the fact that the youth were so passionate about finding actual change and driving change. And we wanted to help them and mentor them and help them understand that we were taking this seriously. So we set out a challenge amongst all of the UN Technology Innovation Labs, got thousands and thousands of ideas. Some of the most amazing ideas came from these youth all over the world. And the winners actually were at our climate change conference with the Secretary General, with Greta, and then presenting these solutions and tools actually to business leaders like Bill Gates and Al Gore. And it was an amazing experience. And I think that's the paradigm we need for 2030. If I look at 2030, what I want to see is that we're finding solutions from the ground up that are scalable and sustainable, because we've actually mentored and resourced, that's a big key, resourced the people on the ground that are living these problems.
I know Yusuf is not a fan of problems and solutions, and we have to think about, let's say, new ways of scenarios, or let's say even imagination, right? Mark said about the movies. So we see a 3D printer, or what we now call a 3D printer, which was in Star Trek 1969, and generations of techies basically and developers worked on these challenges or this imaginative piece, and then brought it to our world. Now, one thing I want to ask Tia is, okay, we are talking about, when we talk about cities, and we know the statistics in 2050, 70% of humankind will live in cities. And then most people say, here's a statistic, that's the truth. So the only solutions we need are for cities because that's where everybody lives. How can we think differently, and how can we think about connected villages or, you know, regenerative communities in rural areas which actually don't have to leave the city because it's livable and even more maybe sustainable, especially with better food and so on and better air quality in other parts except in cities? How can we have that? Can we induce this mind shift and not just believing that, you know, one number from somebody and then everybody else is just following the truth?
Hi, we're back. You know, the ability that we have to transform the way that we feel is at the center of what we design. And when we become more conscious of our senses and we expand those senses, we become much more aware, not only of ourselves, but also of others. We've gone from the point of our own perspective and transformed that to the we perspective, let's say the I to the we. But how do we really get to the global cosmic perspective of the way that we want to live? We might have, you know, LEED certification of buildings, but I remember the first ever building that we judged in Saudi Arabia being the LEED Platinum building, and they didn't quite have it there. You know, often we look at these sustainable development goals, but it's one goal at the cost of the rest. It's okay, I'll just sort the water bit out. Everything else can be done by other people. But I think we have to use these sustainable development goals, even if it comes to the way that we design places to live, as a foundation upon which we innovate. These aren't the goals, these are the foundations. Every brick needs to be in the building already. So when we look at the future of cities, we are looking at not just smart cities. I did the first ever PhD on a smart city, and it was a zero carbon, zero waste city called Masdar in Abu Dhabi. And when I challenged them, they didn't like it because they realized that everything that came to the city was from outside of the city. We started to create methodologies of carbon, you know, neutralization. So zero carbon, zero waste didn't exist before that. That was Norman Foster's vision. And now today, at the time, you know, 10, 15 years ago, we were thinking about net positive. But what does net positive actually entail today, where we design environments and create experiences, whether they are cities of the future? Who knows whether we'll be living in cities? Maybe our environments will have completely morphed to underwater, up in space. We don't know. Why limit ourselves?
All right, we go deeper into this also in a second. Mark, if you look maybe at one of your favorite topics, food. So how can we dig deeper into this, and how can you take it? Where would you see a most positive future of 2030 in regards to food, nutrition, and health? Maybe as well.
So we all obviously know from the title of the lab that we're in that past sustainable development goals, past sustainability, we need to build resilience into our system and think well beyond 2030, well beyond 2050. And how do we get that resilience there? I can tell you right now, beyond resilience is what we call regeneration. How do we restore or live in harmony with our world? How do we get a world that works for everyone? And the craziest thing that most of us might forget, but Yusuf mentioned it when he was here talking about his croissant this morning, the most basic energy resource on our world is not fossil fuels, it's not renewable energy, it's a caloric intake, which is a measurement of energy, calorie. I don't want you to count calories, please do not count calories. But that is the basic measurement of energy. It regulates our body temperature, our heat. It keeps our motor running so that we have energy to go throughout the day to have meetings and events like this. And that resource is the biggest, that energy is the biggest impact on human health, on agriculture, seafood, beverages, and food industries, but on our planet and our environment. And we haven't been calculating the natural capital, the true cost, the fair wage, the fair trade of that for decades, for centuries. And we're at a negative of total environmental cost as percentage of EBITDA, but also natural capital that we are wasting and using in the wrong way. And so when we figure out it's not fossil fuels or telecom or automotive industry that's the biggest cause of human suffering and greenhouse gas emissions in our global grand challenges, but that which we put in our mouth every single day. Hindu Umaru Ibrahim sat here and said some wonderful things. Yusuf did, Kim did as well. But basically, to sum it up, our health, all humanity's health, the way we feel in our body, is a microcosm of the world around us. If the world around us, the biome is suffering, the biodiversity loss is suffering, we have air pollution and problems, eventually that feedback loop gives our human health problems, obesity, diabetes, overweight, health issues with air pollution, asthma, etc., that causes a ripple effect in our world. And so food needs to be globally reformed, global food systems reformation, but we need to think if we can fix that, because we all hopefully do it 3 times a day, and we can make that in harmony with a symbiotic earth or with our biome, and do that in the right way instead of at a deficit, that is the biggest silver bullet that we have towards combating climate change. And the biggest innovations during this pandemic and this lockdown have all really been around food. Around food has continued as a vital resource, as the only operations that have continued moving, good, bad, and ugly. We've seen how the meat industry, huge effects on our environment, been shut down on human health, but then new innovations in food, cellular agriculture, vertical farming, controlled environmental agriculture, precision fermentation, have all been on the rise as sustainable innovations for purpose to get us on the right side of history.
All right. Thank you, Mark. Okay, if we think about, let's say, nourishing for our brain, now, what are unusual steps that we can take in order to, reach our goals before this decade is out? So we know there's these, let's say, the different achievements, the different goals, but we also know there are different players. We have policymakers, we have the UN as a body, we have corporations, we have individuals, we have, kids of all generations, including us ourselves as, kids and playful beings, I think. We have imagination, we have, science fiction writers, we have people who are active in mangrove forest and reforestation here in the room. So all of you, as well as, with your experiences here, how could we basically, what are ideas, what have maybe been events or triggers that help us to reach some of these goals in a maybe unusual way? Have you seen something which is surprising, enlightening, and something which is maybe not in a conference center, with lots of high security and wait times and so on? So what are pieces of futuristic behavior, if you will, that we can see or have seen over the last 1 or 2 years, and what you think will hopefully continue?
Well, I loved what you said about the individual, and Mark, what you said about the collective. And really what we're talking about is an inner Green Deal that taps into the morphic resonance that's all around us till we achieve this tipping point where it's the only way to be. Each one of us individually, it's an inside job. We each need to take responsibility for finding the joy in nature again and the love. One of my favorite solutions that actually came out of a climate action event at the UN was called Grow Your Own Cloud. And they actually have found that you can store your data in your houseplant. And now, because we've mentored them and worked with them, they've actually know how to retrieve it from the houseplant. So within 3 days, you can store your data and then extract your data. And this is something that completely came organically from the ground up and is now being mentored and resourced and becoming a reality. So that's my hope for the future, that we have many, many more of these.
Gosh, that's beautiful. That's incredible. Imagine growing an entire forest of data centers that were, based on renewable energy, and you never needed to worry about cryptography being based on coal powers. Yes, absolutely. Imagine if you were to extend that and use, let's say, geothermal energy or green hydrogen energy in order for you to fuel the financial systems and structures that we have today. I mean, I am really impressed with the kind of technology that people are bringing about just purely from an imaginative sense. One of the things that I love the most out of solutions, let's say, that could be really quite exquisite, is often we look at these solutions being outside of us. We look at, maybe someone's got a solution, in another country. But I think, we've come to the point where we don't need another hierarchy. We don't need another kind of global United Nations for all planets, because if we look at the structure of many of these nations, let's take India's Prime Minister Modi. 2070, mate, I'm not even going to be alive then. 2070, I can't even imagine what 2070 is going to look like. If you want to solve the crisis, if there is one that you need to look specifically at, it's actually an internal crisis, because climate change is an existential threat. It is about humanity. The planet doesn't care. She'll flood you out, get rid of you. Bye. It's not a planetary thing. We're not here to save the planet. We're here to save ourselves. And it's a very selfish measure. So if we want to evolve, it is an internal journey of evolution. And that comes from evolving the way that we think, behave, and act, and capturing that in a way that we are responsible for what we do. Often, you might throw something on the floor and think, well, that's not my responsibility. At least I've put it on the floor or into the dustbin. But I strongly believe the philosophy is to go right to the root of that and to take full responsibility for every single action that you have, but also to go beyond that and to acquire almost like the accreditation and the permission. Waiting for somebody else to give you permission ain't gonna exist. So you've got to give it to yourself.
Very well said. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Mark, you are a contributor, not only for our first book, but also for this up and coming book. And you want to answer this question as well. And you want to recite from what you wrote already. All right.
So there's a bunch of things that really touch on. I want to kind of tickle and tease a section. I don't know how many here are familiar with Paul Hawken's book, The Drawdown, but in September of this year, Paul Hawken came out with a new book, and it's called Regeneration. And I want to read you just a little quote where I quote him in my words, because I mentioned to you what's beyond resilience. Where do we really need to go as humanity? And I'll unpackage that here in a minute. The climate crisis is not a science problem. It is a human problem. The ultimate power to change the world does not reside in technologies. It relies on reverence, respect, and compassion for ourselves, for all people and all life. It is regeneration. And that's from his book, Regeneration, Ending the Climate Crisis in One Generation. It is really interesting because a lot of what we've talked about here today, we don't realize that we have the most revolutionary, the most evolutionary innovation that human history has ever seen. And that is that symbiosis is an ecological phenomenon and a major mode of evolutionary innovation that has been ignored for far too long. It's the most impactful way when we realize that we're on a symbiotic earth and that everything works in harmony and in regeneration, that regeneration is found on all levels of life. And that's the way our world has always worked. And if we realize that, make that collective shift in consciousness, that collective intelligence, and we apply that and work more in harmony with nature and the way we do everything, regeneration has really become a buzzword. So I've been asked to speak on that for the last 4 years, and everyone, because I come from organic farming, regenerative farming. They always assume I'm going to speak on regenerative agriculture. Wrong, wrong answer. There is regenerative medicine, regenerative economics. There is regenerative everything. It is how our world works. It's how it has always worked. We emerged out of the primordial soup. We walked out of the plains of the savannas, and it is through symbiosis and regeneration that we stand here today and will stand here in the future if we come to that realization. It is such a powerful thing to know how this works on all levels of life and how we can apply it as an economic model for the future that is well beyond capitalism. I mean, Paul Hawken's book, Green Swan, says regenerative economics.
That's John Elkington.
Or John Elkington, sorry, not Paul Hawken. John Elkington's book, Green Swans, says regenerative economics. What? There's regenerative economics? Of course there is. That's how our world works. If we get out of extractive economics, capitalism, and move towards the way the world really works, I think we have a key to success.
Thank you, Mark. Again, thank you. Before I come to the closing question, what do you expect from the next future of this next 2 weeks here in Glasgow? I just want to invite everybody again to on the screens to learn about the white paper from these authors. Also, all of the presenters here, and including Yusuf, are part of our leadership program, which is an online training course for leaders in sustainable innovation and execution. So there's 50 experts from around the world, which we invited from different industries, from UN agencies, from NGOs, as well as individual experts and startups, to share how are they already active in solving the SDGs. And for us, our goal at the Futur Institute is all about how can we inspire more people who are not here in Glasgow, who are at their desks in their farms or in their schools, to really think how could they learn the necessary skills, how can they upskill, reskill, as well as cross-pollinate, learn from other industries, learn from other fields and expertise, to really think how can they become also a leader. And the leaders in the course are really active already, and for me it's an inspiring source of global players like here on stage, and obviously including Resilient Frontiers as a lab. I have maybe a last provocative question and or image in mind, because when you started with food and it's getting into the lunch hour, so I think if we think about pizza, probably pizza has been one of at the forefront of innovation, and not because of the food part, but imagine if you have robots, delivery robots, well, what are delivering pizza? And there's so much talent wasted in AI for 5-minute faster pizza delivery, which is something which is the technophilic dream, maybe, or wet dream of saying, wow, we have all this technology, how do we apply it? And they apply it just to more technology stuff. And I think that's, for me, the biggest mind shift here, is to say, how can we use the talent of technology, of technologists, digital transformation, whatever, have the sustainable transformation, but also, and I have that little bit glimpse of hope that the, let's say, regenerative economy is also influencing venture capitalists to say there is now trillions to be made in, let's say, sustainability. Let them have the finance part, that we can have solutions so that, obviously, hopefully this is faster than before this decade is out, that this shift is coming. So hopefully their policy, the European Horizon Europe program, is giving $500 billion into this, and so on. So there's so many things we can still share, and this is where we also can have an open mic after this closing question. So now the question for you is, what are you expecting? What are your plans for the next 2 weeks here in Glasgow? You are all very active. I start with you, Diane. What's your plan? What's on the agenda for Glasgow? What are you expecting from this next 2 weeks?
Thank you. For me, it's all about the women and the indigenous populations and the pilgrims who have made their way up to Glasgow. It's the people on the ground that are actually here because they believe strongly in the planet. And I'll be hosting the UN Global Compact session on the 10th of November, which will have Antonio Gutierrez and as well as all the UN leadership connecting also with the business communities. So if you are familiar or you are a member of the UN Global Compact, I would encourage you to join that session online. I don't physically, it might be challenging, but definitely online, and it's open for everyone. So that's what I'll be doing.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to extend that. I invite you all to jump online, replenish.earth. A lot of our work is going onto a live platform that we've got on gather.town. I'll be here every morning, 10:30, without fail, launching another pathway. And I'd love to go into a lot more depth of what these pathways are, what they lead us to explore. But you know what? I expected probably those negotiations are going to go in a direction that I might have already known, but that doesn't mean that we do.
Yay.
Thank you, Tia.
There's a lot going on at the COP. So for those of you who are not here, and those of you who are here, we really need to put into perspective. We are in the pavilion area of the blue zone. There are probably 100 booths here or pavilions. All of them are having meetings like this one every hour for probably 6 to 8 hours a day at the same time. So 100 times 8 hours times who is already overwhelmed just with that statement? That is, yeah, we're all raising our hand. It feels like we're all shouting at each other. And it's the easiest and quickest way to divide us and to confuse us by thinking that our voice is better than someone else's message or voice. We need to unify as humanity, realize we are all Homo sapiens. We all crawled out of that primordial soup, and we are all global citizens, that we will move forward together and only together. And if we do not realize this symbiosis, this connection, we won't make it very far. We're all in this together. There is no place to hide from climate crisis, from climate change. If you found the spot, let me know. I want in. But I think we're all on this spaceship Earth together to make a solution. So I could name numerous events that I'll be speaking at, but it's not about that. It's about, let's come together. Let's hold COP26 delegates, parties, feet to the fire, that they make the commitments that they missed in Madrid. And let's move towards resilience and regeneration. Thanks.
Let's have a big round of applause for our expert speakers, Tia Kansara, Diane Dane, Mark Buckley. I'm honored to be in their presence, and I can just learn every day from all of you. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody here in the room. Thank you, everybody on the screens. We will now go to our experts, Pascal Morgan and Christian Situ, who explain more about the white paper. I hope you have a chance to download it. And all of you in the room, please, if you have questions, we will be here around. And we say bye-bye from Glasgow and have a fantastic day.
Wonderful. Bye-bye to Glasgow. What an amazing speech, right, Christian? It's really hard to top that. And it's a wonderful opportunity to be part of this discussion, a wonderful opportunity to be part of this team and also moving forward. So thanks very much. I feel very humbled of being part of this. Just a quick introduction to myself. My name is Pascal Morgan. I look back at almost 30 years of a career in the space of technology, and as a corporate CIO and innovation director, but also strategist and executive in various capacities and also creative in agencies, and went independent with Think, Speak, Transform about 4 years ago, where I think, speak, and help people and organizations to their own transformation. And my core focus is how can we actually bring technology, for instance, to the UN SDGs? How can we make things more sustainable, not using AI to make the pizza delivery 5 minutes faster, but seriously sift through all that data that we need to crunch all the weather data, the climate data, find new ways how we can actually design our system in a more efficient and sustainable way. Yes, also proud faculty member at the Futur IO Institute, also engaged with several startups, do a lot of speed coaching in that space, and enjoy these projects and also collaborations, for instance, also with Christian. Maybe you want to introduce yourself, Christian?
Hello, everyone. Similar to Pascal, really humbled to be part of such a community. And I also have had the privilege for a couple of years now to learn, to be inspired by people like Harald and some of the faculty members you've seen today in Glasgow around him, like Tia, like Diane, like Mark. And the reason why I've accepted with a lot of enthusiasm to be part of this initiative, as you see on the screen, right, being one of the curators, is because I believe, especially the corporate executives, and I come from a corporate career, need a lot more exposure to this sort of things. Mark was mentioning earlier, that there are hundreds of events in Glasgow, and yet I meet in my daily work, corporate executive, extremely smart people who still have the tunnel view, and it's all about the corporate, maximizing the productivity and so on. There's definitely been a strong wake-up call for the last couple of years, and I'm happy to also play my small part in bringing that up. So my profile, as I mentioned, corporate career, but the last couple of years I've actually spent at World Economic Forum. Since a year, I've relocated to Sweden, to Stockholm, and I'm involved in various initiatives here locally, everything related to new digital technologies as well as sustainability. Coming back to the message that you also find in the white paper, my article there is about sustainable digital transformation, because I think it's almost irresponsible to discuss only about digital transformations without thinking of the sustainability angle. And I must say that sustainability angle has a double definition. It's sustainability through economic sustainability, right? Traditional corporations need to survive in order to be able to continue to pay their salaries for their employees, and the employees can have an impact in the community. But then it's sustainable digital transformation from the perspective that every piece of technology, every new capability that is being leveraged by large corporations should also be reflected into how can that corporation and how can that executive who has the privilege, the mandate to lead a digital transformation can have an impact that goes beyond the corporation. And again, it's really encouraging to see that there's kind of an awakening, a renaissance, if you want, of more and more executives who realize that we all share that responsibility. It's not something that we can leave it for the people who happen to be in Glasgow at an event like COP this year. It's responsibility for every single of us, and obviously it goes beyond corporate executives. It's for each one of us as human beings.
Yeah, so I can only second that, and thanks for that, Christian. I think the moment Harald approached us on see how we can actually also help the process with this white paper and collecting, curating, and designing also the message and the format around communicating what we need to do as our wake-up call before this decade is out, is because what we need to achieve by 2030 to actually lay the foundation that we have a sustainable habitat. I mean, I think Tia Kansara was very right. It's about actually saving our habitat on this planet. And then also going beyond, because we see already the impact happening if there no action is taken and we're on this 3.2 Celsius trajectory. This is going to be like a 18% GDP impact on global economies, which is going to be massive. So it's not only our habitat and our ecosystem collapsing, it's also our economic system as well. And that's going to create a lot of impact on migration, on people, on how they can actually survive in those regions that are usually already economically at a disadvantage, right? So I think that was actually the core message on Before This Decade Is Out white paper, is to bring these voices together and make them very clear and very concise. And it's really fantastic to work together with contributors like Mark Buckley, yeah, with Jennifer Schenker, with Alan Moore, with Carsten Linz. Also, we had the opportunity to also formulate our own thoughts as well, Christian and myself, around how we can actually design digital transformation in a way that it pays into sustainability, but also from my perspective on why it's important to have the right set of values for leadership moving forward. So I just think just touching on the four main pillars on the white paper, who we want to communicate to, who we want to activate, who we want to incentivize, is, you know, this in the space of business, of society, of policy, and also of leadership. So looking into business, we are very familiar with the topic around, okay, we are in a shareholder economy, but we need this end-to-end transformation to a stakeholder economy. Yeah, it's where everybody involved end-to-end is impacted. They have a way how to co-design and co-create the process moving forward. But as of today, we need to activate the business, because right now that's where the money, that's where the power, that's where the jobs are, that's where the main impact is. So how can we, for instance, I've had corporate background in telecommunication, but also worked at a corporate like a Coca-Cola. How can we transform these companies to be more sustainable? Because we have to get away from these, you know, from pollution, from non-circular economies, from one-way exploitational value chains to more a circular approach. And that's right now where the money is. But in the future, we're going to have different economic systems, and that's where we need the big reset. But society as well, you know, consumers, employees, citizens, well, how can we actually start, you know, redesigning the society of the future? But policy making, that's where the decisional power is to talk about, you know, governance and frameworks. How do we incentivize the economic change and the shift? And last but not least, what I was just touching on is around leadership, right? Because, you know, we are all leaders in our own space. It's not only about, you know, the 60 plus typical white male dominated kind of economic system. It's about bringing everybody to voice. It's the next generation. It's a Generation Z or the alphas that are coming up right now. How can we actually enable and empower them? They're going to be the leaders of the future. It's what I loved about what Diane was saying, you know, also, you know, bringing in the indigenous people, you know, everybody that is actually in this whole ecosystem, bring them to the table that they can co-design and also co-create the future. Yeah. So maybe, like Christian, you want to touch on some of the things around the content and some of the articles, because I think it's quite amazing what we were able to put together and work together with some great authors.
Indeed, and as Harald mentioned, you know, earlier, this publication is really kind of a preview of a bigger book collection, you know, that we'll aim to curate for next year. But already, you know, what you see in this publication as a teaser, it's touching all of those different pillars that Pascal was just describing. And indeed, you know, starting with the piece from Mark, and you've heard him, right? So you know exactly what's the angle and what's the call to action you can expect from his piece. You mentioned Jennifer Schenker. She's the editor-in-chief for an amazing magazine called The Innovator. I had a chance to collaborate with her for a couple of years, and she has an extremely rich collection of examples of either startups that come up with solutions that could play a role in fixing the climate challenge, as well as corporations that either alone or in combination with some of those startups are doing it. And it's linking to what you mentioned earlier, Pascal, you know, like a lot of the corporate leaders have the mandate and they have the financial resources. And, you know, talking about digital transformation leaders, very often they also have a role to play, let's say, in those corporate venture capital arms that many corporations in the last couple of years have established. Almost it's become trendy, right, that each corporation has something like this. And then, you know, when you look at the two worlds that I just described, right, you have collections of startups, right, climate technology that can really at scale or together combined play a role in fixing the climate challenge. And then on the other side, you have, you know, the executives with a mandate on large amounts of money with corporate venture capital arms. It's a responsibility, I think, for those executives to make sure that they educate themselves on which are some of those startups and solutions that have an impact on the climate technology, but are also obviously complementary, are also close to their core business. Because I can guarantee you, if you have a look, you're going to find some partners, you're going to find some startups that resonate strongly with your vision, with your vertical in your industry, with your customers. Like, your customers will be excited to know that you're teaming up with startups that know, besides playing a role in their industry, can also play a role in fixing the climate challenge on the longer term. So those are the sort of things that you'll find in the article. And Pascal mentioned also pieces from Castellins, for instance, with multiple chief digital officer roles, but also he has an amazing bestseller book. It's called Radical Business Model Innovation. So you'll also discover their thoughts on how to link very real, concrete challenges every corporation is daily dealing with, right? Like how to survive, how to innovate, how to disrupt on the long term, but also how to link it to sustainability. And as I said, it's almost irresponsible today for corporate leaders to not link the two. And just recently, I had the chance to be in the room with the CEO of a major corporation, and the way he put it, he said, sustainability not only is the right thing to do, but it's clear, it's obvious, it's also good for business on the long term. So in a way, there's almost no excuse to do something, to Pascal's words, that only helps the shareholder economy, shareholder capitalism, instead of doing also something that has the sustainability layer towards stakeholder capitalism, where we as humans, we as citizens, as consumers, as employees, we're also part of that group of stakeholders. And of course, the most important stakeholder of all is planet Earth. And as Tia and Diane and Mark and Harald earlier mentioned, right, this should be selfish for us as a human species, that we want to fix this for us and for the generations to come, because we are the ones that will have most to lose if we are, we have the tunnel view and we focus on the short term instead of really trying to fix something that's so obvious and the facts are there.
Yeah, very true. And to be honest with you, as myself, as a proud father of 4, it's really what we need to do to provide not only a perspective on how to save our habitat, but also to empower the next generations and our youth to actually, take over and to steer into a future that is also worth living in, and a future that is desirable for everybody. And that's why I think it's so great that we have the opportunity in this project before this decade is out, is to hear their voices and to bring them also together, and to also capture some of the thoughts and the impulses of their own personal commitment. What would they like to see? What would they like to contribute? And how can we bring those voices together? Just like what we saw on stage, and also what we asked you to add, to not only Mark's voice and Diane's voice, but also we have, Yusuf in the document. We have Teresa from the World Economic Forum there. And this is going to be expanding into the next year of having more voices, because there's so many different perspectives that we want to look at. So, these articles are going to be covering a lot of different aspects, the future of cities. How do we want to live in the future? How do we want to actually, manage resources and have like a more net zero approach on designing? But one thing I do want to add is, I think I had that quote from Margaret Mead. Let me just quote this for a second. Never doubt that a smaller group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. So this is the opportunity for us, also as thought leaders. For me, thought leaders is really everybody involved and everybody that wants to do it. It can be a 15, a 24, a 65, and a 95-year-old thought leader, and everybody in between. Yeah, but thought leaders mean we have to just get together and get moving, and work on this kind of collaborative exchange, and just move forward. Be bold and move forward. And even as a small group of citizens, we're going to have a halo effect. We're going to have impact. We're going to have influence. We're going to be able to engage with more. That's how, for instance, Fridays for Future, for instance, started around Greta Thunberg. And that's actually, some of the role models we need to capture and move forward with.
I will only add as the last thing, and it's great to see this on the screen, with we need to listen to our youth voices as well. And I think, we should all try and should realize that we have a responsibility to be ambassadors for those youth voices. And we see that they are a lot more connected to the climate crisis. And we see that they are a lot more vocal in terms of what they're expecting from today's leaders. And in a way, it's kind of obvious we will be judged by those new generations, right? I mean, they will come, they'll be the future leaders. They will judge us in terms of where have you, invested your energy and time when things were so obvious, when things were so critical. And I'm happy that at least, we start seeing more and more pressure on many of us today from this generation, the younger generation. And I'm happy to see that narrative, that call to action, that urgency, we find it more and more in mainstream channels like mainstream news and mainstream documentaries, and even in cartoons for, the kids, which also encouraged me to the point of realizing this is not a niche. We're not, a small group of people that care deeply about those topics today. Maybe, people like Mark, like Tia, right? They've been definitely early adopters, and, they've been early believers that, the urgency is there, and they helped, raise this alarm. But now I think, it's definitely into the mainstream, and it's no longer, acceptable to just ignore all of those signals. And we all, thinking about also change management, we can all be change agents, right? Starting ourselves, changing our own lifestyle, our own habits, but then, influencing the people around us, our siblings, our friends, our families, our communities. And one by one, we'll all put the pressure on each other. We'll all put pressure on leaders, to the 4 chapters Pascal was teasing earlier, right? Also with leadership, with societal angles. So let's not underestimate the power of each one of us.
Yeah, absolutely. So in that sense, not only not underestimate, but also like a great big thanks. Thank you very much to all the contributors. Without your help and your support, your kind support, and very insightful articles and collaboration, this wouldn't have been possible. Thank you very much also to the Futur IO Institute for hosting this and curating this project, and everybody involved, the team behind it. Thank you very much as well. A big shout out to Marie. And everybody that was actually engaged in this process. This was actually a very interesting undertaking. It's just a very good example of how this actually works, not only the macro space, but also in the micro space as a project itself, the way how we collaborated, co-created this project. So I'm very proud to be part of this. And I really look forward on expanding this then also for the next year. So thanks, Harald. Thanks, Futur IO. Thanks, Christian. It was fantastic working together with you as well. I think we rocked this space, and I look forward on expanding our ideas.